Hey there, interwebs. My previous monster video took months to research and produce because it featured over 40 mythical creatures. I hope you learned a lot from it, just as I have, and one of the things I learned was don't make a video with 40 plus monsters in it. Because I've learned my lesson, at least for the moment, this video will focus on just one mythical creature. Gorgons, and by extension, Medusas. I'll also touch on the Epp-Leppel and Calcatauri, but I'll get to them later. Right now you're probably thinking one of two things. One is, that plural should be Medusae, to which I reply, that would be correct if I were referring to jellyfish, but I'm not, so the word is Medusas. The other, far more likely, thing you're yelling at your screen is that Medusa shouldn't be pluralized at all. She is a singular mythical creature and her species was a Gorgon. Again, you'd be correct, if I were exclusively referring to the Medusa of myth, but such is not the case. In the original Greek myth, Medusa and her two sisters, Stheno and Euryale, were the daughter of Phorcys and Ceto, and comprised the Gorgons. Of the three, only Medusa was mortal, and so Perseus was able to kill her. Much later, the Roman poet Ovid would retell her story such that she was once a beautiful woman whom Athena transformed into a monster. For a full version of that story, check out the Greek mythology video. These days we tend to picture Medusa and her sisters as having snakes for hair and possessing the ability to kill anyone who looks upon them, usually by petrifying them, but those are just about the only features everyone agrees on. Many modern depictions show Medusa as having a serpentine body from the waist down, which is basically Ray Harryhausen's doing, but it's also perfectly common to see her with legs, and this ancient Greek vase shows her as a centaur. So, how did Gorgons go from centaurs to Ophidians? The simple answer is that there never was a standard look for the Gorgons, and to be honest, there still isn't. When something is as ancient as the Gorgons, there's going to be loads of accounts, and they'll never all agree. An early source describes them as girded with serpents, which might refer to a belt of intertwined snakes, an ancient fertility symbol. The snakes appear as hair in Aeschylus's Prometheus Bound, which also says they have wings, brass claws, and large teeth. Stheno, the eldest sister, was the most independent and ferocious, and she had the highest body count and red snakes in place of hair. The middle sister, Euryale, had snake hair as well, but she is best known for her piercing, bellowing cries. Other depictions seen on vases and shields show the Gorgons with serpentine locks of hair, protruding tongues, long teeth like fangs or tusks, pig-like noses with flared nostrils, short beards, and wide eyes. These eyes deserve special mention, as they've been represented by spirals, concentric rings, spoked wheels, swastikas, and other icons. Many of these traits are shared by the Araignées, also known as Furies. These are typically three women with bat wings, snakes for hair, and blood-red eyes. Exact depictions of these vary as well, and other features include canine heads on coal-black bodies. Ever since I learned this, I've been unable to picture them as anything but Roddies in Medusa wigs, which, now that I see it, looks kinda like some depictions of Kerberos. Oh, who's a good girl? Who's a good... Sorry, I'm getting off topic. I should really address the most important question. Is she hot? Well, sometimes Gorgons are ugly, sometimes they're pretty, and sometimes they're just pretty ugly. The oldest accounts we have say they were so hideous just looking was enough to kill you, but recent depictions show Medusa and or her sisters as more conventionally attractive because no one wants to look at ugly people. Shocker. Medusa being attractive is actually older than you may think, though. Roughly 5 centuries prior to Ovid's Metamorphosis, Pindar described her as fair-cheeked. If you want to get all metaphorical, you could argue that the Gorgons' transition from hideous monsters to a tempting seductress is a product of the times and represents our own evolving image of evil. Gone are the days when feral beasts were our greatest enemies, and we must recognize that humans are the real monsters, led by human temptation to do wrong. It's worth stating at this point that originally the Gorgons weren't really considered to be evil or overtly malicious, just terrifying, and their evil tendencies are a more recent addition. As they grew more beautiful on the outside, so too did they grow more ugly on the inside. As a great man once said, I do not think the wildest beast so terrifying as what I know civilized men may do. It was me, just now. In the days of yore, before their transformation, Gorgons were even seen as protectors and acted as guardians of the oracles. 3 paragraphs ago I casually mentioned that Gorgons appear on shields, and it wasn't just decoration. The fearsome visage was placed there to ward off harm and evil spirits, and a Gorgonian was a special amulet of a Gorgon head to serve the same purpose. It's an interesting sign of human universality that gargoyles and grotesques on churches were very similar symbols with a very similar purpose. Both were scary images to frighten away other scary things. Somewhere between then and now, Medusa became the name for an entire race of snake-haired people, though you almost never see male Medusas, and as usual I blame Dungeons & Dragons, since they classify Medusas and Gorgons as separate monsters with little in common. According to D&D, a Medusa looked like this, and a Gorgon was a sort of metal-scaled bull. Amazingly, they weren't the first modern work to depict a Gorgon as a metallic taurine creature distinct from Medusa. They were beaten to the punch by Marvel's The Inhumans, which featured one character named Medusa and another named Gorgon, who had super strength and the hooves of a bull. Both of them were introduced in 1965. Now, I'm not sure about Marvel, but I'm almost certain that I know where D&D got this image of a scaly bull with deadly breath. It would be Edward Topsell's 1607 Bestiary, The History of Four-Footed Beasts and Serpents, and this is where the Epp-Leppel enters the picture. You see, Topsell seems to have gotten some chocolate in his peanut butter and confused the Gorgon with the Epp-Leppel. For those who don't know, the Epp-Leppel was a mythical beast from the mythical land of Ethiopia. Thought to have been inspired by the wildebeest, its name means to look downwards and refers to the fact that its head is so heavy the beast can't lift it. Thus it's forced to root around in the muck for food. Pliny claimed that its gaze could kill people by petrifying them, but Claudius Aelianus said instead that its breath was lethal, due to eating toxic plants. He also said that it had the body of a bull with a scaly back, and now you can start to see where all the confusion comes from. This is what Topsell recounts in his book, but he refers to it as a Gorgon or the strange Libyan beast, and specifically says that it has scales like a dragon in addition to its poisonous breath. He even features an illustration of it on the cover. As a quick tangent, Topsell's text is also from whence we get this image of Lamia as a scaly leonine monster. Lamia actually shares a striking number of similarities with Medusa. Both are Greek women who were turned into monsters by divine wrath, and over the years they've both transformed from tragic monsters to serpentine seductresses. This popular depiction of a Medusa is even sometimes referred to as a Lamia. Returning now to the Epp-Leppel, this Afrogorgon also appears in D&D under its original name, complete with its large body, maned neck, overweight head, and deadly gaze. It's often found blighting the very land it inhabits, and can insta-kill a 5th level Aarakocra wizard. The game's version of a Gorgon may not be very similar, but it's very similar. Nevertheless, dragon scales are a far cry from its hide of metal plates, and I believe there may be yet another beast of classical mythology which inspired this feature. This creature, or rather pair of creatures, are the Colchis bulls, also known as the Kalkotoroi. They were created by Hephaestus, the Olympian blacksmith, and they had hooves and mouths of bronze and could breathe fire. It's not a great leap, then, to picture them as having a metal hide as well, and thus we have another bull with deadly breath and an armored body. If the Epp-Leppel was inspired by the wildebeest, like the rhinoceros inspired the unicorn and the cyclops was inspired by dwarf elephant skulls, what inspired the Colchis bulls? I'm glad you asked, because I've got a pet theory about this, although I couldn't find any academic sources that agree. What are the most dangerous parts of the majority of quadrupeds? It's the teeth and claws, or hooves as the case may be. Why not make your mythic beasts even more frightening by making these parts out of bronze, the metal used to make most swords at the time? It makes sense, at least until you remember one very important fact. Bulls have horns. Surely anyone wishing to give these creatures a damage buff would specify bronze horns as well, but they didn't. This leads me to think there may be another explanation. The simplest answer is that their hooves were as hard and as shiny as bronze, not made of it, but that's boring. This is a horseshoe. This is a horseshoe made for the cloven hoof of an ox. It's unsurprisingly called an ox shoe. It's hard to nail down exactly when the horseshoe was invented, but some of the earliest finds we have date back to before the Hellenistic period. An early forerunner to the modern horseshoe was a sort of bronze boot known as the hip sandal, and its predecessor was the solei ferrii. Could these have been the Kalkatoroi's famous bronze hooves? Again, I'm spitballing here, and no bronze hippo sandals from the correct period have been found in Greece, but I still wouldn't count it outside the realm of possibility. Where did the bronze mouths come from, though? Funny thing about that, in all of the classical Greek texts we have describing them, there's only one mention of bronze mouths, despite countless mentions of bronze hooves. If we include the later Roman sources, the only mention of the mouths comes from Ovid, who said their nostrils were adamantine, not bronze, and also claimed that their horns were tipped with iron. We know he wasn't just updating the metal to modern materials because he still said that the hooves were bronze. It's probable that the few mentions of metal mouths were only there to justify the fire-breathing, but if you want to get archaeological, we know nose rings have been in use since the beginning of domestication. Maybe these bronze hooves and snouts were just the metal bits attached to an ox. But back to Gorgons. These days, whether or not something is called a Medusa or a Gorgon varies by work, as does what exactly that includes. As I said at the start, most at least agree on petrification, but not how it works. It's becoming common in modern depictions for their petrification power to require making eye contact, thus allowing the creatures to avoid being hideous and the audience to get a good eyeful without falling victim themselves. In settings such as Discworld and Monster High, where the race isn't inherently villainous, some members avert the issue altogether by wearing sunglasses. You've also got the goddamn Medusa heads in Castlevania that love nothing more than to knock you back out of the room to make all the monsters respawn. As the name implies, these are just her head, and only the gold variant have petrifying abilities. One of the strangest depictions of Medusa I can think of isn't truly Medusa herself, but rather an alien race named after her, the Medusans from Star Trek. These non-corporeal entities are named after the most famous Gorgon because they're so alien that any mere human who gazes upon one will instantly go mad attempting to grasp its true form. Are you feeling okay, Trek? Because that's some Lovecraftian shit right there. As I said at the beginning, this is probably the most recognizable version of a Gorgon or Medusa in the modern era. She has a serpentine lower body and snakes for hair, but is otherwise not unattractive. Some people might call this a Naga or a Lamia, while others, myself included, call it an Ophidian. According to D&D, this is a Naga, this is a Lamia, and this is an Ophidian. This is a Yuan-Ti half-blood. The look I personally prefer for Medusa, and by extension all Gorgons, is a scaly reptilian biped with snakes for hair, feathered wings, and magical eyes. I've also taken the wide, tusked mouth and lolling tongue from the classical depictions and reinterpreted them to be a snake's fangs and flicking tongue. As for elements from modern tellings, I reject both the bull body and the snake tail, since that's more of an Ophidian thing. The only metal bits are brass nails and a nod to Aeschylus, but these are press-ons. She's not conventionally attractive, but beautiful the way a snake might be. She's stunning to behold, but you wouldn't want to snog her. This brings my Guide to Gorgons Part 4gons to a close. If you enjoyed it, share this video, follow me on Twitter, and pick up a copy of my novel on Amazon. Artwork was provided by Dan Scott, Douglas Blash, Dylan Lowe, Corova, Lucid Art DVC, Marcos Cabrera, Maria Manrique, and the lovely and talented Quinn Platzer. As always, all the links are in the description. Thanks for watching, and have a nice day. Some people are really into Alucard, but where's my series about a good-aligned demi-gorgon named Asudem? Not that there were any traditionally, but would a male Medusa be an Androgorgon? Steno? Thano? Uriel? Urali? New theory, Medusa became the catch-all name for Gorgons because the other two need a pronunciation guide. How apropos that a video about snake ladies should have so many sibilant sounds. I feel like I'm turning into a snake just recording it.